We finally have the Set 9 Meta Snapshot. I know you all have been waiting for this, but we are going to go over the comps that we think are going to be the best at the start of the set. So let's get right on into it. We have the S, A, B, and C tier, and keep in mind more and more comps are going to be added, and also we will be making an update to this tier list in the next week as well. Keep in mind that in the start of the set, things get a little wild because all the ratings are kind of mixed together, so everyone's playing against each other, and it's not really like Challenger versus Challenger, Silver versus Silver. It's kind of like Diamond versus Gold or something like that, and everything in between because all the ranks got reset. But let's just get on into it. I think these are the comps that are going to be the easiest to climb with. Depending on who you are, obviously, you might find some things a little bit different. But in the S tier, we have Gunners, Deadeye, Ionia, Yordle, and Void. All these comps are super strong, and it definitely favors the AD comps in Deadeye and Gunners because you could kind of play both at the same time, depending on what you hit. In the A tier, we have some reroll comps. We have Garen, and then we have Challengers and Demacia. And then on the B tier, Kalista Reroll, Karma Reroll, Noxus, Shurima, and Rogue. And then in the C tier, we have Teemo. We plan to add a lot more team comps to this list, so definitely keep an eye out in the future weeks. But let's get into how to play each and every single one of them, including who the best item holders are, what leveling pattern you use, the best emblem and spatula holders, legends that I recommend using, along with like exactly how to play, items, augments, all that good stuff here. So start off with Gunners. So Gunners, you always want 4 Gunner because the main carry of Gunners is Zeri. And then who works well with Zeri? Well, Jinx is a Gunner and Zon. So you automatically start out with 2 Gunners and 2 Zon. After that, Jace is such a good support unit that there's no reason not to run him, so you run Jace. So then you're 3 out of 4 Gunner. If you have like a Gunner emblem or something like that, or a Gunner heart, then yeah, sure, you could stop there. But if you don't, which is most games, you want to add in either a Senna or Tristana in order to get to 4 Gunner, because it's just adding in 1 more unit, and Senna's a legendary, so you want to use her anyways. So always 4 Gunner is what I'm trying to say. After that, you have some tank options. And honestly, there are a ton. Your tank line is pretty much going to be very, very flexible. You just go whatever you hit with. It could be something like this. We have 2 Bruisers with Sejuani and Sion, and then we also have Shen and Lissandra for Invoker and Freljord. Now you may be wondering, because I got a lot of comments about this in the last video, why do you have Last Whisper on Zeri if you have Freljord? So if we actually click into the comp and go into the Freljord trait, we can see that after 8 seconds, an Ice Storm strikes the battlefield, and enemies take a percentage of their maximum health as true damage and gain debuffs. And then the debuffs are going to be Sunder and Shred, as you can see on the very bottom. So then why do you need the Last Whisper? Well, this debuff from Freljord doesn't last the whole fight, so a lot of times you still want the Last Whisper on your main carry because fights last longer than those like 10-second windows, or however long the buff is. So that's why I still recommend building Last Whisper in a lot of comps, even if you're already running Freljord. You can feel free to check the data on this. Last Whisper is one of the highest performing items on Zeri with Freljord active. And yeah, the reason why it works is pretty much what I just said. Freljord doesn't last the entire time. That doesn't mean Freljord is bad, you're still running it, but it's just why you also have the Last Whisper. Also, sometimes in the early game you don't have it either, and you could just kind of build it there and use it. But again, the front line is very, very variable, as we talked about before. You really just want the 4 Gunners in the back, and then you could run a bunch of other stuff, such as the Zon front line. You could run Urgot and Echo, and then kind of build around their synergies there too. So let's move on into the how to play section. So it's just standard leveling pattern. I'm going to be releasing a leveling guide later on, but if you want to check it out, it's already on the website. If you go to the very top, bunnymuffins.lol, and then click on the leveling guide. So I made a few updates here. We have the standard leveling over here, and then beneath that we have the 1-cost reroll, 2-cost reroll, and 3-cost reroll. And if you are new, I will be releasing a video on how to read this chart. But if you have been on the site before, then you'll know what to do. But there are slight changes because obviously like the leveling intervals got changed from previously. But back into Gunners, Zeke's Herald is pretty good for itemization on Jace. Just because Jace, you want to put your carries right next to him anyway, so it just kind of makes sense to build Zeke's on him. So that's why I recommend the Legends, Twisted Fate, and Bard, because both of them can give you the team-up augments, which are just pretty solid overall for the team. But you don't have to play that. You don't even have to build the Zeke's at all. It's just, if you like it, just go ahead and do it, because Zeke's is a pretty popular item right now. But if you want more info on the how to play section, and you want like all the different item options that we have down here, along with like all the augments, head on over to the website bunnymuffins.lol/meta and check that out. And if you like the team builder, because it has all the augments there and stuff, there is a lot of other champion information that you could kind of look into at teamfight.lol. Keep in mind, it is a work in progress, but soon enough, everything should be working on the site. But let's get into Deadeye right now. So Deadeye is going to be the second attack damage comp that we're going to go over. And this one's going to revolve around Aphelios carry because he's the most expensive Deadeye. Deadeye is really good because sometimes you just snipe people in the back line. This is also a good comp on pretty much all of the different portals. So don't be afraid to go this every single game if that's what you kind of like. You could pretty much flex between Deadeye and Gunners every single game, and you probably would be doing pretty well. There are slight itemization differences. Obviously, like the tank items are all the same, but the damage items are like very similar. Like you could use Rage Blade, you could use Hand of Justice, you could use the IE like we saw before, but you could also use the same exact items. You could use the Giant Slayer and Last Whisper on Aphelios also, and vice versa with the Zeri. They pretty much share all the same items. It's just going to depend on what you kind of built that game. But for this comp, you want to do standard leveling. Item holders are like Jhin, Tristana, Ashe are all really good. And you pretty much just play AD flex as you see in the how to play section down here. But unlike Gunners, the core of the comp is either 2 or 4 Deadeye. You don't always need 4. It's nice to have because all the complementary Deadeyes are pretty decent. For example, like Urgot's just like a solid tank and DPS, so if you want Aphelios plus something else, it's like always going to be Urgot. But then Ashe is a very good support unit because 1, she unlocks the Freljord trait, and 2, she slows the attack speed of the enemy team. So she's just very useful overall, and then it unlocks a lot of different synergies and traits that you could kind of use as your front line. But again, as before, you could kind of flex the front line and pretty much go with whatever you hit. Just make sure that you hit your back line. So AD flex, pretty strong right now. Let's move on into Yasuo Ionia. This comp is pretty strong because Yasuo is just overall like a pretty decent carry. He's one of those melee carries that we talked about before, and I'm going to be releasing a guide later on what makes a good TFT comp. At least that's like the second half of that video, and you'll kind of understand why certain items belong in certain comps. But on the Yasuo, you definitely want some sort of defensive item, such as a Edge of Night or a Quicksilver, because that allows him to just pretty much go off and do a lot of work on the enemy team. But this comp is mainly run around 6 Ionia, so that's going to be like the core of the comp. So if we look at those units, it's going to be like Yasuo, Shen, Ahri as the first 3, and then like Set, Aurelia, Jhin, because Aurelia gives Challenger, and then Jhin is like a nice person to pair up with Aphelios just to run 2 Deadeye as your secondary carry, because Aphelios is still pretty solid. Main tank is going to be Shen though, because he is Ionia, and then you want to pair up a Bastion with him, so that's why you add in the Taric. Taric also gives Sorcerer with the Ahri, but you could also run like a Cassante if you get Cassante later on. Some of the good augments we have are on the right-hand side, like the crit augment's pretty good because both Yasuo and Aphelios use it pretty decently. All the Ionia augments are pretty good, and you can find the full list down here in case you forgot some of the icons that you see up there. But some of the good item holders is going to be Warwick. He's probably the best item holder for Yasuo because they use like pretty much the exact same items. Some survivability item, Titan's Resolve, and then like a healing item's pretty decent. Obviously, Warwick doesn't need the healing because he has a built-in heal, but it's still pretty nice to just have as an extra bit because a lot of melee champions or a lot of melee carries, they could have more than like one source of healing because they just take that much damage. But standard leveling for this comp again because you're revolving around 4 cost carries. And you typically play this comp as you transition from like a partial Ionia start into a full Ionia board later on. So you definitely start with just like 3 Ionia, and you don't really go to 6 right away at level 6 because you need to get like the good Ionian units. You don't want to just run a lot of the crappy ones. But you could also get here from challengers, as you see here, but your carries are mostly 4 cost units. So you don't have to play full Ionia boards and like hard force Ionia. You can kind of just like play best board, and then if you happen to hit some of them on the way down, just pivot into this board that you see up here and really go for it. Unlike the first 2 comps that we went over, this comp is not as flexible with the units because you're running a vertical trait. Vertical meaning like going deep into a trait such as 6 Ionia. You pretty much need 6 Ionia to really get it online a lot. But let's move on into the next comp, which is Yordle Reroll. So Yordle Reroll, you just want a bunch of 3 stars, and then those 3 stars are going to make one of your Yordles into a 4-star. And these could be any of your units. It doesn't have to be the Yordles. I made that mistake when I played on like the PBE like a couple weeks ago, whenever it was. But Tristana is going to be your main carry, and then Poppy is going to be your main tank. But you don't need like Tristana 3, Poppy 3, and then like Heimerdinger 3, because that's the only 3 Yordles we have here. you could do Tristana 3, Poppy 3, and then Viego 3. That could work and give your Tristana the 4-star status that she kind of gets. But overall, like, a lot of players are playing Yordles right now because I think Reroll is just more dominant in some of the early set metas. At least that's what I've seen from the past. It's either like pure fast aiding or kind of just re-rolling anything. I feel like the roll down at 7 is like, it's still good obviously and it still has its place, but I think in the start of the set people just like smurf on each other and then you just go like all out in sort of one strategy. Obviously this doesn't happen all the time, but it's a pattern I've kind of noticed throughout the years. But to play this comp, you want to play as a 1-cost reroll. So you want to slow roll at level 5 above 50 gold, but you also want to follow like a very specific rolling pattern. And again, we'll go into that in the leveling and econ guide, which will come out with like probably, I hope on Monday or something like that, Monday or Tuesday. So definitely subscribe to the channel if you have not already. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers, which I think is wild. We might even hit it in the next week if I am so lucky. And if you guys deem me subbable or whatever it is, you know, subscribable. I don't know what the word is, but some legends I like for this comp is a Lee Sin comp because the on a roll augment, the silver one, is really, really good for 1-cost reroll because you get so many free rolls. You just buy all the 1-costs in your shop and you're just constantly like rerolling the whole round because it's free, you know, and then you just hit all the 1-stars that you want. And very, very, very powerful. So definitely like Lee Sin is pretty good for this. I don't like the other Lee Sin augments that much, but it's still pretty solid. And we will be coming out with a legend guide later as well. But items for Tristana, just generic ADAS items. Guinsoo's Rageblade. I think Guinsoo's is the best item for her. And then Guinsoo's also flexes into a lot of different builds. And then just put like 1 healing item on her and then more damage. And then 4 gunners. That's about it. That's all you have to do. But let's move on into the next comp, which is Void. So Void is a little weird because it gets a lot of power from just the Rift Herald. So if you ever get a game where you have a +1 Void, this comp goes from like low S tier or like high A tier to like S+ tier because the Baron is, I mean, it's Baron. It's a legendary champion, iconic to the game and the lore, and it just has to win because of that, right? But yeah, +1 Void augment turns it into like S+. And that's pretty much the only time you would want to play this comp. You could go for 6 Void normally without the +1 Void, but I don't recommend it. It's like, yeah, it just isn't as good. But the good news is that you could run 4 Bruiser in the early game because it's really easy to get from Rek'Sai and Cho'Gath. And then you run like Vi, and I forgot who the other Bruiser was, but any 4 Bruisers in the early game just completely dominate stage 3. And then later on, hopefully you get a +1 Void augment by the time stage 4 rolls around, and then you go into 6 or 8 Void to kind of stomp stage 4. And then in the super late game, you do fall off a little bit unless you get like Bel'Veth 2-star, but if you get 2-star legendaries, you're going to be chilling pretty much no matter what. Another thing I want to mention is that you do not really want to re-roll Void. So it might be tempting because Cho'Gath, Malzahar, and Kastan are all really low-cost units, and then Rek'Sai and Vel'Koz are both 3-cost units, so you might be tempted to like reroll 1-cost or like reroll 3-cost with Voids. And it could be good. Maybe in the future we see some of those like very powerful builds. I think reroll Vel'Koz works much better in different builds, like non-Void builds, but I think just going for 8 Void is much stronger because you don't really have to rely on hitting anything that crazy. You could get to 6 Void pretty easily without Bel'Veth. And then if you do get the +1, then you rely on hitting Bel'Veth rather than getting the 3-stars. It's much easier to hit 1-star Bel'Veth than like 3-star Vel'Koz, for example. But items, your main carry is going to be Kai'Sa, Guinsoo's, Giant Slayer, Static Shiv, Archangels, things like that are going to work great on her. Even like Morella Namikon is pretty good too. And then Bel'Veth, you could just put any of your AD items on her, and then utility and tank items on the rest of your team, and then you're good to go from there. Oh, and by the way, one good legend for this is Urf. So you could play Urf and then just pop the Tome of Traits. If you get Void, just play Void. If you get stuff like Piltover, you could do like Piltover. There are a lot of different vertical traits that you can kind of explore with Urf, so it's definitely like a really interesting character right now, or legend. But let's move on into the A tier. A tier is still good, and obviously in the start of the set, you could play literally anything to climb with. You don't have to play S tiers, you don't have to play A tiers, like you could play like D tiers even, because as long as you just like play good TFT or you play comps in the right spots, that's going to be more important than whatever a comp is on a tier list. So I don't know why tier lists are so divisive. People are like, oh my god, can't believe this comp is here, that comp's there, that comp's not. But it's like, if you just play the game, you'll realize that like tier lists aren't that important, because if you don't have the right start for it, you just can never go for the comp. A discussion for a different day, but it's just funny, and I know people are going to say stuff like that. But Garen Reroll is pretty interesting because 3-star Garen just literally spins to win. It's hard to win games though, but you can get like top 4s very, very easily. And luckily for you, there are a lot of 3-stars you can roll with Garen. So a lot of times with reroll comps, there is only one unit you really care about. But in this comp, you could roll for Garen, Darius, and Sona. They're all 3-cost units. So whenever you do a slow roll at level 7, you're gonna hit a lot of your 3-star units. So after that, you want to put in 6 Juggernaut if you can. Obviously, that doesn't happen every game because Aatrox sometimes doesn't show up in your shop. So you could just play 4 Juggernaut, you'll be fine there, and then add in other units such as like maybe 5 Demacia, for example. But this is just leveling up to level 7 as safely as possible, slow rolling for 3-stars, and then you just really go from there. You don't really have to do anything else. Good legends for this is the Poro. I think Poro, you don't really need any of the early game legend augments, so Poro is just pretty decent for like better augments later on. And then Master Yi is pretty decent as well because you could get the attack speed going. Onto the best emblem holders. I think Jarvan's the best emblem holder for Juggernaut, but you could also use Sona if you like just don't have Jarvan for some reason, but it's generally going to be Jarvan. Onto the next build, we have the Challenger build. So Challengers, these are going to be, they're a bit of a weird spot. They kind of are like duelists from last set, but not really. I don't know if that made any sense, but they don't really scale that hard into the late game because they don't have like that many good tanks. So in the late game, your tanks get shredded and you don't like deal enough damage to kind of just kill everything because you don't really have that legendary cap. For example, the Gunner comp, they have Senna as their super late game, but in the Challenger build, you don't really have that big of a legendary to like throw into say like GG or something like that, but they're still pretty good. You could do like the Locket build that you did with Duelist before, except you do Kaisa and Yasuo carry and just play around the 4 cost. Pretty decent, pretty solid overall, but nothing like that crazy, so to speak. But pretty much just know that you are going to be playing for the early game, because a common mistake that people make with the Duelist comp from before is that they played it as if they're like trying to win every game, and you can't do that with this comp. Like just play something else if you want to do that, but if you want to get like solid placements overall but maybe not like win that many games, like just try this build out. You might be surprised. Let's move on into the next comp, which is the Demacia comp. That's with Lux carry. So notice there are only 2 items on Jarvan and Lux. You could put 3 on them, but I like having the Radiant item on them. But if you get like a perfect Lux item, definitely build 3 perfect Lux items because she's gonna be your main carry, right? Sometimes it outshines the Radiant item that you could get, but the great thing about this comp is that you don't need like super duper perfect items because you get the Radiant item in the cases where you don't. So that's why I like just having 2 items in the picture on both Jarvan and Lux are gonna be your main go-tos. After that, like Garen or Sona could be your other Demacia holder. I believe 7 Demacia gives like 3 elites or whatever you want to call them, and those are going to get those Radiant items. This comp is pretty easy to play, but you want to play it with like a Demacia opener because the comp is a little difficult to pivot into. So in the early game, if you have some sort of AP champion such as like Cassiopeia or Malzahar, use those to carry Lux items, and then later on you could use Sona until you find Lux. After that, any of the tank items or the bruiser items you could put on Jarvan. And then in the late game, you have a lot of room to add extra units because this is pretty flexible. You could do 5 or 7 Demacia. So you could drop Kale, you could drop Poppy to put in like the big bombs later on. So like Cassante, Heimerdinger, things like that would definitely fill out your team there. But Demacia is pretty solid. Lux is actually a pretty good unit. I like her a lot in like Sorc comps, Demacia comps, pretty much both kind of work. Let's move on into the next build, which is going to be the B tier, Kalista Reroll. So Kalista is going to be a good comp if you are kind of like high rolling, because the issue with Kalista Reroll, if we compare it to Garen Reroll, let me see if you all notice the difference. Garen Reroll's over here. Look at the picture of the comp, and then look at Kalista. So if you pass the test, you would notice that Kalista doesn't have many other 3-cost units in the comp. because Challengers, the only 3 cost is Kalista, and then Shadow Isle, the only 3 cost is Kalista. So the rerolling for Kalista is pretty risky because you're only going for 1 unit, whereas in the Garen comp, you have like 3 other units that you can kind of go for. Obviously, there are different versions of the Kalista comp, but you definitely want like 4 Shadow Isles. Sometimes you could even get to 6 if you get the +1, but you also want a bunch of Challengers, so it's kind of hard to fit in those like other 3 cost units from other traits just to kind of hit them if you hit them. The good news is that this comp is really powerful if you get her online because she just wipes through things so quickly. But it is a risky comp just because you're only going for 1 unit. Items for Kalista, you definitely want the Rage Blade, that's the best item, and then after that it doesn't really matter that much. Gwen's going to be your secondary carry, just put AP and survivability items on her. You want like at least 1 form of healing because Gwen is kind of just in their face and is going to be taking a bunch of damage. The next comp up we have is Karma Reroll. So Karma, she's also a 3-cost reroll, but you also have Taric and Lissandra to kind of like roll for at the same time. But this comp is really powerful because you don't need very specific items. So with 6 Invoker, you gain a ton of mana on your Invoker units, obviously. But what does that mean? Normally in the past when you play AP carries, even if you play like a Sorcerer comp nowadays, you need like Blue Buff or Shojin for your Lux. But in Invokers, you don't need any mana item at all because you get the mana from Invokers. So you could just build 3 damage items. And it's a lot easier to build 3 damage items than it is to build 1 mana item and 2 damage items. So that's what I like about this comp. The items are like a lot easier to do. And like 3-cost reroll, you have a lot of things to go for. You have like 3 3-cost units and 2 2-cost units. You could easily hit a lot of them at level 7 and you'd be very surprised. But yeah, you just go to level 7, slow roll, get Karma 3-star, Lissandra 3-star, Taric 3-star, and then just use those to kind of steamroll the game. If you have 3-star Taric, put the tank items on Taric. If you only have 2-star Taric, put the tank items on Shen. But sometimes you don't get to decide that, but if you get like an item remover, you could kind of save it for those situations. But yeah, for Karma, 1 healing item and then 3 damage items is just going to be the preferred way to go. For augments, Golden Ticket is extremely good because it gives you a ton of rerolls. March of Progress is just really good right now in general, but they might change that in the future. And then any like reroll augment is really good, or any one that it helps your invokers. So like the Needlessly Large Rod one's really good, and then the Invoker one's really good too. Onto the next build we have is the Noxus Reroll. So this one is going to be revolving around Darius and Katarina. So you want at least 2 Juggernaut and at least 2 Rogue, but 6 Noxus is pretty good. So Darius is going to hold all the AD items, Katarina is going to hold all the AP items, but you also want healing on both of them. So really good augments for this comp is something like Harm Assist or Healing Orbs because they give a lot of healing to your team, so you can save like 1 item slot on both Darius and Katarina. Not to say that you can't build the healing items anyways, because they're going to be like in the front line, so they're taking a lot of damage, but sometimes it alleviates that pressure of like griefing your carousel in order to get those types of items. As your other like item holder, Echo is kind of like the leftover guy. It's just because you might get him to 3-star, so you kind of just use him there. This comp is a little tricky though, because if you do get a Noxus opener, you do start getting the stacks right away because you beat some of your opponents. But if you pivot into Noxus, sometimes it's a little hard to get some of the stacks, and sometimes you could lose out. Also, 3-cost reroll is just really risky to play in general, so do keep that in mind, because hitting a 3-star 3-cost, it doesn't happen every single game, at least not for me. But let's move on into the Shurima comp. Shurima is probably my favorite comp so far. I like it because there are a ton of different item holders. You have like Nasus and Azir here, you have Shen for tank items, but you could also play like Jarvan for strategist, and he can hold a lot of items too. And then you could also flex between 3, 5, and 7 Shurima pretty easily, because most of the Shurima units are good, but at the same time, they're still replaceable by much better stuff if you get like a bunch of legendaries later on. But it does require like a bit of high rolling because you revolve a lot around 4-cost units. We have 3 4-cost units here, and then like the other one I mentioned, Jarvan, also 4-cost, so it's a really expensive comp to do. Definitely try to do this on portals or regions where you get a lot of gold, because that's where this comp is really going to shine. For items, Azir really wants the Rage Blade, generic tank items on Shen, Nasus can take like the Bruiser items, but then like Azir's our main guy, so just like Rage Blade and then AP items. Healing is decent on him, but I would only go for Hextech Gunblade. Next comp up we have is Rogue Reroll. I haven't seen this too much recently, but Rogue is still pretty nice because you could choose to go for either Zed or Katarina carry. Sometimes you could do both also, but there's a lot of stuff you could roll for. There are like so many 3-cost units, so many 2-cost units. You could do like I forget the name of the augment, but it's like the 2-cost augment where it's like for how many 2-costs you have, you gain 100 health. There's another one very similar for 3-cost units, but you could play both of those and it's very, very good. This comp is also really good on the Demacia region where you have like the crown. I forget what it's called, but oftentimes people put their crown on their backline and then they forget that it's there, and then your rogues jump to the backline, kill them, and then you instantly win the fight. But just look to roll at level 6 on stage 3-2 for this comp, because you're looking for like Zed2 and Katarina 2 at that point in the game, and this comp has really, really good use of the 3-2 roll down. So for a leveling pattern, you definitely want to do like 2-cost and then 3-cost reroll, but on level 6, on stage 3-2, like pretty much roll to 10, because you're going to get a lot of the units that you want and 2-star everything and then steamroll the mid game. And then later on, you'll econ back up, go to level 7, and then slow roll, hit all the 3 stars. Some item recommendations are down here. Obviously, I like healing a lot on both Katarina and Zed, so at least one healing item. That's why like healing augments are really good. I think I put one of them there. I think that's healing orbs. I'm trying to recognize all the augments because they all do look very different, but I think after a couple of games, we'll be able to recognize them on sight. Last comp that we're going to go over today, and I'm going to add a lot more comps throughout the week and next week, so definitely if the comp that you like isn't here, it's not because it's bad. Sometimes you just forget about some of the comps. Like I thought of one right now, it's a Sorc comp, but also it just like takes a while to like type everything out. And I want to make it good. I don't want to just put it there just to like have it there, but I only want to put it there when it's like truly ready. So I will be trying to update this throughout the week, so definitely look out for that. Like bookmark bunnymuffins.lol/meta if you want to like access it on your second monitor or on your phone while you play. But this is going to be the last comp that we're going to go over. It's the Teemo comp, and then after this we'll go into the legend tier list. So I love this description. Teemo is cute, but this comp needs a lot to get going. Teemo is pretty cute, but blue buff, best item on Teemo, and you want multicasters because Teemo just shoots everything to the backline. For some reason, like he just throws he's like the smartest person ever. I guess that's why he's a strategist, but he just throws the mushrooms, like they always land in good spots. I have no idea why. Maybe that's just how he is like trained in the AI or whatever, but yeah. He does a lot of work because of that. Obviously, you want 4 multicasters, so by default, you run Talia, Vel'Koz, Sona, and Teemo, and then the Yordles are really powerful because you want 4-star Teemo. So Poppy and Kled are really good there, but the only issue with this comp compared to like the Tristana reroll comp is that getting a lot of 3 stars, since it's 2-cost units instead of 1-cost unit, it's a little bit riskier to do. It doesn't happen as often, so that's why this comp is like a little lower right now, but maybe it could get higher later on. But yeah, full description down here. Head on over to the website if you want more details, but let's get on into the legend tier list. So for the legend tier list, okay, so at the end of the day, everyone has their own preferences. So if something works for you, just keep doing it. Like every legend is playable, because let's say you pick the worst one or whatever I think is the worst one. Guess what? You could just reroll the augment and like you just lose one of the 6 augment rolls that you kind of get. You know, it's like it really doesn't matter which augment or which legend that you choose, because like the reroll just makes it so it doesn't matter that much. So I think Poro's the best though, because I don't like a lot of the tailored augments, but if I had to pick one, my personal favorite is probably Pengu, but a lot of the good players, they like Vladimir and Twisted Fate and then Ornn a lot. Earth is good if you like YOLOing, and I'll be coming out with like a full legend guide, I believe tomorrow or Sunday, one of the two. So if you want like a much more in-depth one, definitely keep an eye out for that. But yeah, you can see the rest here. B tier, Veigar, Lee Sin, Caitlyn, Master Yi, Ace, Draven. They're just a bit more situational. And then I think the C tier, like Tom Kench's one, is like AFK and I think like Rich Get Richer or something like that. Like they're fine, nothing wrong with it, but it's like, it's really risky to do, you know, like a lot of these, yeah, they're just better options. But if you like that playstyle, or if you like make it work anyways despite the disadvantages, like if it works for you, just keep doing it. Worst case, you just reroll and then you just lose 1 augment. But going back up to the top, if you want a sneak peek at some of the comps that I'm gonna be adding throughout the week, they're down here. But yeah, overall, like I think AD Flex, the Gunners, and Deadeye are gonna be pretty much my go-tos. They could be your go-tos. It doesn't have to be either, but those are going to be mine. And that's assuming you actually want to climb. You could also just play the game for fun and just go whatever you want, right? It's like, if you're not having fun playing the game, I don't know what you are doing. But I know a lot of people, they play games and they like don't have fun while playing games. And then I'm like, what are you doing? But yeah, if you also want more like specific info, such as like what's S plus, what's S minus, I do have like sub rankings on my Patreon or OnlyFans, so definitely check that out if you are interested in that. But that's gonna be it for me today. I also need to change this to set 9, but lots of guides coming up this week. It's gonna be the legend guide, the leveling guide, the portal guide, and other stuff too. I like the fundamentals of TFT if you want to learn all that. So definitely keep an eye out for that. So tip of the day is follow all my stuff, because there's going to be a lot of juicy stuff coming out this week. And if you want to become a better player, like I pretty much say all the stuff there. So that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you all enjoyed that, and I'll see you all later. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.